Welcome to True Crime Bites, Death Row and Executions, where we honor lives lost and revisit the final chapters of those who crossed the line. On October 17, 2025, Arizona plans to execute Richard Kenneth Djerf for the 1993 murders of 4 members of the Luna family in West Phoenix. If nothing changes in court, the state will carry out the sentence by lethal injection at the prison complex in Florence. A date on a calendar can feel sterile, but this one is tethered to a house, a neighborhood, and an afternoon that turned into a siege. Months before the killings, Djerf nursed a grudge. He was 23, angry over a burglary at his apartment, and convinced that his former co-worker, Albert Luna Jr., was responsible. Police didn't arrest anyone for the theft. Rage fermented into a plan, misguided, personal, and catastrophically violent. On September 14, 1993, he drove to the Luna home armed with a 9mm Beretta, a knife, handcuffs, rope, tape, and a vase of artificial flowers to help him get through the door. Patricia Luna answered that door. She was a mother doing what mothers do, moving through a weekday with a kindergartner, 5-year-old Damien, underfoot. The flowers were a trick. The gun was not. Djerf forced his way inside, bound Patricia, and used her love for her son to control every minute that followed. He made her gather electronics, jewelry, and other items and load them into the family car. He taped the mother and child to kitchen chairs. He asked her more than once a question that no human being should ever hear, whether she or her child should die first. He demanded to know where Albert Jr. was. At about 3 in the afternoon, the front door opened, and 18-year-old Rochelle Lynn Luna came home from high school. In seconds, the house became 2 crime scenes. Djerf took Rochelle to her bedroom, bound and gagged her, cut away her clothes with a knife, raped her, and stabbed her. He slashed her throat, severing a jugular vein. The injuries told a story the courts would later repeat in stark prose. She struggled against the restraints, aspirated behind the gag, and knew terror before she died. When he went back to the kitchen, he told Patricia that he had killed her daughter. Around 4 o'clock, the family's father, Albert Luna Sr., walked in from work into something no father should ever face. Djerf handcuffed him, forced him to crawl to the master bedroom, and beat him in the head with an aluminum bat until blood spattered the room. Believing the beating had finished him, Djerf left. Albert freed himself and attacked with a pocket knife in a last desperate bid to save his family. The fight was brief and brutal. Djerf stabbed him hard enough to drive a blade through the forearm into the torso, then drew his Beretta and shot him 6 times. Albert fell at the feet of the people he was trying to protect. What happened next still takes the air out of the room, even on the page. Djerf tried to snap Damien's neck, like he had seen in the movies. When that failed, he stripped a lamp cord, taped it to the boy's leg, and tried to electrocute him. He then posed the monstrous question to Patricia again. Did she want to watch her child die, or did she want her child to watch her die? He shot them both in the head at close range. Before leaving, he splashed gasoline around the house and on the bodies, tried to light a fuse, then abandoned that and propped a pizza box and rag over the stove burners, turning the gas on to spark a fire that would erase his crimes. The improvised arson failed. The house went quiet. Hours later, close to midnight, Albert Jr., who hadn't been home during the day, came through the door, found the scene, and fled to call the police. By then, Djerf had driven away in the family car, checked into a motel, and begun telling people what he had done. To his girlfriend, he said the blood was really awesome, that she should have been there. He repeated the boast to friends. Within days, Phoenix police served search warrants on his motel room, car, and apartment. They recovered the gun, the handcuffs, electronics and jewelry, the artificial flowers, the fuse cord, evidence that read like a list of props from the worst day of the Lunas' lives. They arrested him. What the legal record shows next is both simple and devastating. Rochelle was a senior at Trevor Brown High, a runner and a teenager who balanced school with shifts at a local grocery store. Damien was 5, a kindergartner whose world was cartoons, snacks, and the logic of a child's day. Patricia spent hours that afternoon trying to buy time with words while calculating unimaginable choices. Albert Sr. walked in, assessed the nightmare, and attacked the intruder with the only weapon he had. And Albert Jr. came home to a silence that no one should ever have to meet. In headlines and court captions, they became the Luna family. But the case endures because, for a few hours, they were a mother, father, daughter, and little boy, fighting to survive inside their own kitchen. The case never went to a jury on guilt. Djerf's path through the courts began with appointed counsel, then a period where he insisted on representing himself. After an apparent jailhouse suicide attempt, a judge ordered a competency review. He was found competent and allowed to proceed pro se. In August 1995, he pleaded guilty to all 4 first-degree murders. Weeks later, he put lawyers back on for sentencing. In May 1996, after a hearing on aggravating and mitigating factors, the court imposed 4 death sentences. The judge's findings were blunt. The murders were committed for pecuniary gain. They were especially heinous, cruel, or depraved. They occurred during other murders, and Damien's killing was aggravated by his being under 15 years old. The Arizona Supreme Court affirmed the convictions and sentences in 1998. The United States Supreme Court declined to interfere. Like all capital cases, this one then moved into years of post-conviction litigation. State relief was denied. A federal habeas petition followed. The district court rejected his claims. The Ninth Circuit affirmed in 2019, sketching out a timeline that had grown to fill binders and a docket sheet measured in inches. In 2020, the U.S. Supreme Court again said no. By the mid-2020s, the state took the position that Djerf's appeals were exhausted. Outside the briefing, memory held on to the facts. Detectives who worked the case said it never left them. Reporters remembered the artificial flowers, the taped chairs, the switch from bludgeoning to stabbing to shooting, the failed arson, details that sound like a gruesome checklist until you remember they all happened under one roof on one afternoon. Arizona resumed executions in 2025 after a long pause. Prosecutors asked the Arizona Supreme Court to set a death warrant for Djerf. The court set October 17, 2025. Defense lawyers pushed back, asking for delays and raising case management hurdles, including a cyber attack that had complicated access to some records. The court moved forward. If the warrant holds, Arizona will use the same lethal injection protocol it has recently used for other executions. Between now and the set date, there is still law to work. Lawyers can pursue any remaining state claims, file last-minute federal challenges, and seek clemency from the Board of Executive Clemency. Unless a court finds a defect or grants a stay, the Department of Corrections will prepare the chamber at Florence, finalize witness lists, and coordinate transport. Daily life for a condemned person in Arizona is austere and controlled. Single-man cells, restricted movement, limited contact with other humans. Letters and drawings sometimes make their way out. Otherwise, the world is concrete, steel, and routine. On an execution day, the choreography is relentless. Transfer to Florence, intake, final legal and spiritual visits, a last meal from the ordinary menu, medical prep, the warden's script. Witnesses, some from the victim's family, some selected by the condemned, are held in separate rooms. At the appointed hour, 4 lines are visible through the glass. If nothing stops it, the procedure itself is clinical and brief. None of that procedural description can or should compete with the human truth at the center. The Lunas were a family. Rochelle was old enough to work a shift and still tape photos to her bedroom mirror. Damien's whole world fit into a backpack. Patricia spent her last hours speaking to a man who had already decided to destroy her family, and she kept fighting with the tools she had left. time, compliance, words to keep a child breathing for one more minute. Albert Sr. did what many fathers would hope they'd do. He attacked. The law later called all of this especially cruel. It's a dry phrase for what those people experienced. Imagine instead what the kitchen sounded like as the clock refused to move. Imagine the silence Albert Jr. walked into that night. Imagine the shock that rippled through a school the next morning when friends learned why Rochelle's desk was empty. As the date approaches, two things will be true at once. Lawyers and judges will be engaged in the careful, technical work that the law requires at the end of a capital case. And somewhere in Phoenix, people who knew the Lunas, teachers, neighbors, relatives, will mark another date connected to the same loss. However anyone feels about capital punishment as a policy, this story is not abstract. It began when a man, angry over an old grievance, decided to bring a gun, a knife, and a pair of handcuffs to a family's front door. It continued through hours that collapsed a future into terror. It traveled through plea papers, sentencing transcripts, appellate opinions, and a warrant. And it returns in 2025 to the people at its center: a mother, a father, a teenage daughter, and a little boy whose lives were taken in a house on a hot September afternoon in the city that still remembers them. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and enable notifications. As always, stay curious and stay safe.